Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a genuinely revolutionary approach to global governance. We are looking at A.M. Nuruddin's brilliant new book, Fairness as Foundation, a complete architecture for structurally fair governance. Listen, if you've ever looked at a political system and felt like, the whole game was just rigged from the start, regardless of who was actually in power, well, this is going to be incredibly eye-opening for you. We aren't just talking about minor policy tweaks today. We're talking about literally tearing down the invisible walls of structural unfairness and redesigning the very architecture of how we govern ourselves.
Okay, let's dive into this. Why do democracies die through the law? It's a huge paradox, right? Because we usually picture democracies failing when a tyrant rolls in with tanks and completely tears up the Constitution. But this explainer reveals a totally different, kind of hidden failure mode. Democracies are dying because their actual substance is being legally hollowed out. Rulers aren't even breaking the law anymore, they're breaking democracy through the law. They're using perfectly valid procedural mechanisms to systematically strip away fairness.
Now, to really understand how this works, we've got to follow the author's personal journey. Nuruddin was born in Hathazari, Bangladesh. Back in 2006, the election where he was supposed to cast his very first vote was just canceled. And that sparked a lifelong quest for him. Fast forward to 2018, he's studying India's structurally sound election mechanics. Then, in 2022, he arrives at George Washington University to study U.S. governance. He was totally expecting to find the perfect democratic model there. But instead, he had this massive global revelation. Every single democratic system, even the really mature ones, has deep structural flaws that produce unfairness. And this brilliantly illustrates the core thesis of the book, which comes down to one simple, powerful idea. When a bridge falls, we do not blame the drivers. We redesign the bridge. Nuruddin argues that governance is essentially infrastructure. Think about it. When corruption is rampant or power is abused, we spend all our energy asking, who failed? Which bad person did this? Instead, we really need to ask, what structural features actually produce this outcome? When the system fails, we have to fix the design, not just blindly search for more virtuous people to drive on a broken bridge. So it's time to systematically bust what is probably the greatest myth in modern politics. The myth is that governance fails because of bad, corrupt, or selfish people, and the solution is just, elect better leaders. But the reality? Governance fails because of structural architectural design. Systems are actually built in a way that inverts authority and subordinates the governed. Even if you put the most well-intentioned people into these flawed architectures, the design itself makes domination the path of least resistance.
Section 1. The Anatomy of Structural Unfairness.
The book identifies 3 recurring global structural failures, and they are absolutely crucial to wrap your head around. First, authority accountability inversion. This is when politicians accumulate massive power over the public, but they build these walls to insulate themselves from any real accountability. Second, justificatory subordination. I know, it's a dense term, but it simply means the system cuts everyday citizens completely out of the reasoning process. Your voice just becomes purely nominal. And finally, structural domination. This is when institutions are literally designed to guarantee certain outcomes, totally regardless of what the voters actually want or what the election results even say.
Let's look at a concrete example from the source material to really ground this. Bangladesh's constitution has a rule called Article 70. It forces members of parliament to vote exactly with their party line, or else they lose their seats. Now, procedurally, a vote in parliament under Article 70 is perfectly legal and perfectly counted. But structurally, it's entirely unfair. It strips away all independent legislative judgment and traps citizens in a rigged architecture where their local representative basically has zero actual voice. You see what's happening there?
Section 2. Equitism and the meta-right.
So what's the fix? The foundational philosophy here is called Equitism. Now, what's really interesting is that Equitism is not a political ideology. It doesn't tell you to be left-wing or right-wing. It is a strict governance design standard. It demands that fair institutions must be fairly built from the ground up. It requires structural fairness to be a constitutionally enforceable obligation, not just some vague cultural hope or aspiration that we cross our fingers and wish for.
And to actually enforce equitism, the book introduces a vital legal lever, the meta-right to structural fairness. Think of this as your second-order inalienable right. It means you don't just have a right to cast a vote, you have a right to a system designed so that your vote actually matters. It gives citizens the legal standing to challenge a system's core design, like that Article 70 we just talked about, long before the creeping structural unfairness becomes totally irreversible.
Let's move to and see how this builds. Section 3. Fairocracy, the institutional blueprint.
Meet Fairocracy. If equitism is the philosophy, Fairocracy is the actual operational architecture that implements it in the real world. It's basically an upgraded democratic logic. Standard democracy focuses super heavily on procedural rules, like did we count the votes right? But Fairocracy focuses on fairness constraints. Is the system actually designed to prevent domination from the start?
Fairocracy operates through these specific mechanisms. 1. Multi-institutional consensus, which means no single actor can unilaterally change the structural rules. 2. Capture resistance mechanisms. These distribute power so the system just can't be hijacked. 3. Compulsory public justification, which essentially forces transparency in decision-making. And 4. Continuous accountability. Step by step, these operating mechanics make democratic self-correction possible. You don't need a total regime collapse or a revolution to fix things. The whole system is built to heal itself.
Right at the heart of this operational architecture is the Fair Vote Protocol. This is the core tool that actually fixes the authority accountability inversion we discussed earlier. It redesigns the relationship between the people making the rules and the people living under them, ensuring that those who hold decision authority are directly, structurally connected to the consequences of their actions. It's a real game changer.
Section 4. A framework for all democracies. Now, you might be wondering, how does this apply to my daily life in my specific country? Well, the beauty of this framework is that it's a universal standard. For transitional democracies like Bangladesh emerging from a regime collapse, it provides the structural foundations needed to stop elites from just grabbing power right back. But for mature democracies like the US, the UK, or parts of Europe, the standard is just as vital. Mature democracies desperately need this to overcome institutional complacency. You might have free elections, sure, but you still suffer from hidden structural capture, like campaign finance laws that systematically distort power. The need for a fair architecture is completely universal.
And crucially, this framework isn't just a bunch of academic theory. It includes the Caro Fairness Index. Because let's face it, you can't fix what you can't measure, right? This is a continuous tool that allows us to actually track and measure structural fairness with hard data. It acts as an early warning system, generating data to trigger those self-correcting institutional responses long before a democracy slides into authoritarianism.
So, the big question I want to leave you with today is this. Your democracy follows the rules, but was it built to be fair? Governance failure is an architectural problem, not a people problem. If this explainer sparked your curiosity, I highly recommend picking up A&M Nuruddin's Fairness as Foundation to explore the whole Fairocracy system in full. I promise it will completely change how you view the infrastructure of your own freedom. Thank you so much for learning with me today.